In this grade 9 video, we're going to have a look at factorizing, making use of changing signs and grouping. When thinking about common factor, it is important to realize that 1 will be a common factor for any terms. So in the given expression, we can take out 1 as a common factor, and dividing by 1 means those two terms will stay exactly the same. But we could have also chosen to take out minus 1 as a common factor. When taking out minus 1, we will have to divide by minus 1, and that means that both these terms' sign will have to change. So here we can see that 1 and minus 1 is always a possible common factor for any terms. Because of the commutative law, we can also choose to swap around the two terms in the bracket. So, for example, we can choose to write the positive term first and then the negative. This is useful when we have a look at our next example. In example 1, we have two terms that we need to factorize. But if you look closely, you will see that there's no common factor in these two terms because the brackets are not exactly the same. Both the signs of the terms in these brackets differ, because in the first bracket we have a plus a, where in the second bracket it is minus a. And in the first bracket we have minus 2b, while in the second bracket we have plus 2b. When the signs of both terms in a bracket differs like this, we can use factorization to make it the same. I'm going to keep the first bracket just like it is, but I want to now rewrite the second bracket by changing the negative a to a positive a and the positive 2b to a negative 2b. This can be done by taking out minus 1 as a common factor, and then the whole term sign will change. If I look at these two terms again, I will now see that there is a common factor because the two brackets are exactly the same. So the biggest common factor here is a minus 2b. To determine my second bracket, I'm going to take the first term and divide that by a minus 2b, and I'll be left with 3x. Next, we need to divide the second term by a minus 2b, and we'll be left with minus 1y or minus y. So here, even though the original brackets were not exactly the same, we manipulated them to be the same by taking out a minus 1 as a common factor, because both terms in the bracket had to change sign. In example 2, we still have to factorize, but there's no factor that is common for all four terms. The first two terms have a 2 in common, and the last two terms have a in common. The first and third term have x in common, and the second and fourth term have y in common. When this happens, you're going to factorize by making groups. In this case, I'm going to group the first two terms together and factorize. So I'm going to take out the common factor of 2. When I take out 2, I'll be left with x plus 2y. Similarly, I'm going to group the last two terms together, and here I can take out a as a common factor and I'll be left with x plus 2y. It is important to realize that the factorization of the first group formed one term, and the factorization of the second group formed a second term. That is why it's very important to have a sign in between these two groups to separate the two terms. In this case, I have a plus in between because I did not change the signs of the terms in the bracket of the second group. Now we have two new terms and they do have a common factor. That common factor is x plus 2y. So once I've taken out this common factor, I will be left with 2 in my first term and plus a in my second term. And now that we are left with one term that consists of two factors, we have factorized completely. In example 3, we once again have 4 terms with no common factor for all of them. So again, I'm going to do grouping. Again, I'm going to group the first 2 terms, and then I can take out a common factor of 3x, and we'll be left with x squared plus 2. If you have a look at the second group, you will see that it's already similar to the bracket we just formed. The only difference is here we have minus x squared and minus 2. And that is why I'm going to choose to take out minus 1 as a common factor so that I can change the signs of both these terms. Now we do have a common factor, and that is x squared plus 2. And once I've removed that, I'm left with 3x in the first term and minus 1 in the second term. With grouping, you can play around with the groups. It's not always necessary to group the first 2 terms together. For example, in the last question, you could have also chosen to group the first and the third term together and take out x squared as a common factor, and then you'll be left with 3x minus 1. When you then group the second and fourth terms together, you can take out plus 2 as a common factor and be left with 3x minus 1. Next, our common factor will be 3x minus 1, and we will be left with x squared plus 2. Here you can see that both of these are the product of the same 2 factors, so both of them will be correct.